You hear it all the time, right? People say, oh, I'm so addicted to sugar. But is that a real biological thing, or is it just a figure of speech for really, really liking cookies? Well, today we're going to dig into the science and find out what's actually going on in your brain when that sweet tooth kicks in. So let's just ask it outright. Can you really be addicted to sugar? We all kind of joke about it, but is there something real, something chemical happening that makes us feel that way? Let's take a look at the evidence.
All right, first things first. Before we can decide if sugar addiction is real, we need to be on the same page about what scientists are even talking about when they use that phrase.
So when scientists talk about this, they usually frame it as a behavioral addiction. Think less like an addiction to a drug and more like an addiction to something like gambling. The focus isn't on the substance itself, but on the compulsive behavior, that uncontrollable urge to eat sugary foods that just lights up our brain's reward system. Now, where does a lot of this evidence come from? You guessed it, animal studies. And look, it's kind of hard to study addiction in humans in a controlled way, so a huge amount of what we know comes from research on rats. They can control the environment and see what sugar really does to a brain. And they aren't just winging it. Scientists have a specific checklist they use to test for addiction. You can think of them as the 4 pillars. They look for binging, withdrawal, craving, and this other really interesting one called cross-sensitization. And here's what's so wild. In rats, sugar pretty much ticks every single box. If they only get sugar sometimes, they binge on it. If you take the sugar away, they actually show signs of withdrawal, like anxiety and teeth chattering. After they've been off it for a while, their cravings get even stronger. And maybe the most shocking one, rats that binge on sugar become more sensitive to hard drugs like cocaine. That's a huge red flag. Okay, so the rats are acting like they're addicted, but for it to be the real deal, we gotta look under the hood, right? We need to see what's happening inside the brain and how sugar might be hijacking the whole system. And this is the headline. Sugar activates the very same reward circuits in the brain that drugs of abuse do. Now, this system isn't a mistake. It evolved to make us seek out things we needed to survive, like high-energy foods. The problem is, it can be hijacked. And this creates a really powerful feedback loop. It's simple, but it's effective. You eat sugar, your brain releases dopamine, that's the feel-good chemical, you feel intense pleasure, and your brain basically says, hey, remember that, do it again. And the cycle just keeps repeated. But it's actually even a little more complicated because it's not just dopamine. There are really 2 systems working together. Dopamine is the wanting system. It's the engine that drives you. It makes you crave things. But the actual pleasure, the liking part, that comes from your brain's own natural opioids. And here's the kicker. Sugar hits both of these systems, and it hits them hard. Okay, so the case in rats seems pretty strong, right? But here's where things get messy. We are not rats in a lab. We live in a complicated world, and this is where the scientific community is really divided. Does any of this actually apply to us? So you've got 2 camps. The case for addiction points out that human brain scans show that same reward activation, and lots of people report classic addiction symptoms, like losing control. But the case against has some really solid points too. They argue that the rat studies don't really mimic how humans eat. And, maybe most importantly, we rarely eat sugar all by itself. We eat it in hyper-palatable foods mixed with fat and salt. And that combination might be the real culprit. And this quote from a major scientific review really sums up the skepticism. These researchers are basically saying, look, we just don't see strong evidence for this in humans. They believe those addiction-like behaviors in rats only show up under very specific lab conditions that might not apply to our everyday lives. So, we have evidence for, evidence against. It's a lot to take in. So, where does this leave us? Let's try to pull it all together and figure out what it actually means for you. Let's look at the official rulebook for diagnosing a substance use disorder, the DSM-5. When you compare what happens to rats on sugar to the official criteria, well, it's pretty startling. The behaviors we see in those animal studies check off at least 5 of the 11 official criteria for addiction. That's a huge overlap. So here's the real takeaway. Our brains are basically running on ancient software. We're wired to seek out high-energy foods because, for most of human history, that's what kept us alive. But today's food environment gives us a super concentrated dose that can completely overwhelm those old circuits. And that creates a drive to eat that can feel totally compulsive. So whether you want to call it addiction or not, recognizing this powerful biological pull is the first step. And that kind of leads us to the biggest question of all. We can debate the label addiction forever, But if we know our food environment is literally engineered to hijack these ancient reward systems in our brains, making us want more and more, does the label we put on it really even matter? Okay, let's get right into it. We're talking about sugar addiction. Is it real? Let's find out. You know that feeling, right? That intense, uncontrollable craving for something sweet? Let's check the science. It all starts in the brain's reward system. It's designed to make us repeat behaviors essential for survival. So when you eat sugar, boom, your brain releases dopamine and opioids, those classic feel-good chemicals. And that powerful reward loop, when repeated, is what some scientists have started calling sugar addiction. Now get this, in animal studies, sugar lights up some of the same brain pathways as addictive drugs. Try to quit and you might get withdrawal symptoms, just like with other substances. Sound familiar? On top of that, chronic sugar intake can weaken your brain's brakes, the part controlling your impulses. So case closed, right? Sugar is addictive. Well, not so fast. The debate is actually far from over. See, a lot of researchers are pushing back, saying there's actually very little proof in humans. Remember those animal studies? Here's the catch. The addiction only showed up with intermittent access. Give those same animals unlimited sugar, and the addictive behaviors, they just vanish. Interesting, huh? Plus, for us humans, we rarely eat just sugar. It's mixed with fat, salt, the whole delicious package. This makes it really, really tough to prove that sugar itself is the addictive bad guy here. So what's the real story? Well, like most things, it's not a simple yes or no. So let's think about this differently. Compare a true substance addiction to a behavioral compulsion. They're not the same. The new thinking is that the substance might not be addictive, but the behavior of eating it can become compulsive. And that's the key distinction. The substance may not be the problem, but the pattern of behavior definitely can be.
This leaves us with a big question. If the struggle feels real, does what we call it really matter?